Hey guys, tonight we're taking a late-night stroll down one of the most notorious, chaotic, and weirdly aromatic alleyways of ancient Rome, the Suburra. You'll feel the limestone dust under your sandals, the smoke of roasted chickpeas clinging to your tunic, and somewhere between the fish stalls and a suspiciously loud tavern, you'll start to notice a very particular scent: oil lamps, rosewater, and something much more, musky. You've just wandered into the ancient world's red light district, and no, you probably wouldn't survive this in real life. You'd trip over a passed-out actor, get pickpocketed by a Nerode, and maybe wind up renting a room you really didn't mean to. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing the global bedtime roll call. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's somewhere between sunset and scandal in the Suburra. The sun's dipped low behind the Palatine Hill, and the glow from thousands of flickering terracotta lamps spills out of doorways like warm, smoky whispers. You're already a little lost. Rome's streets weren't really designed for navigation, were designed for chaos, commerce, and the occasional illicit rendezvous. The Suburra is where the respectable and the risk rub elbows, sometimes literally. Senators in disguises, gladiators on their nights off, traveling merchants with full purses and no intention of sleeping alone. And then, there's you. Maybe you're here to observe, or maybe you're holding a small coin pouch and thinking too hard about what hourly rate means. You pass a tavern spilling out its third fight of the night. Someone's singing badly. A woman in a saffron stola calls out from a doorway, reclining against a pillar with all the casual confidence of someone who knows exactly what you're thinking. You do not make eye contact. A chicken runs between your legs. The chicken is, somehow, the least chaotic part of the scene. You brush past a group of young men, cloaks pulled high, sandals dusty, one carrying a garland of flowers that's definitely not going to survive the night. Above your head, a low balcony creaks as two women argue about wine, debt, and whether Lucius is really worth the effort. You hear every word, and you kind of agree with both of them. This is the real Rome. The marble temples, not the statues, not the Senate. This is the Rome that smells like fish sauce and possibility, where walls are covered in graffiti that ranges from profound love poetry to something that would definitely get you banned from modern social media. It's loud, it's humid, and it's full of doorways that promise everything from spiritual rebirth to a back rub you should probably not ask. Follow-up questions about you stop near a fountain to pretend you're here for the architecture. The statue depicts Venus, of course. Half the water features in the Suburra seem to. Cliff's got a chipped nose and suspiciously shiny knees. People keep rubbing them for luck. A woman dips a bucket, glares at you, then tosses the water onto the street like she's trying to clean something that long ago gave up on being clean. Historians still argue whether the Suburra was officially recognized as a pleasure district or whether it simply became one through sheer chaotic momentum. Either way, it thrived. Landlords turned spare rooms into rentable love nests. Some homes had staircases that led nowhere, except to a curtained hallway with 3 doors and a price list. And don't imagine for a second that this was all dim candlelight and sultry sighs. Ancient Rome didn't have mood lighting. What it had was oil lamps, sweaty linen, and the thudding reality of shared walls. Privacy wasn't really a thing. Neither was noise regulation. If you rented a room above a tavern, you were going to hear about it. Every time someone broke a stool, sang off-key, or confessed their undying love while vomiting into a potted laurel, you cross paths with a fruit vendor heading home, his empty basket swinging. He hums a little song, something about figs and betrayal. You make a mental note never to ask. And then, just up ahead, you see it. A row of narrow doorways. No signs, just faint lamp glow and the kind of atmosphere that says asterisk someone is absolutely crying inside, but it's probably not your business. Asterisk welcome to the Roman Love Hotel, or at least, the ancient equivalent of one. It's not fancy. There's number front desk, no mint on the pillow. But there's a heavy curtain over the entrance, and a thin woman with expertly smudged eyeliner glances at you without blinking. She jerks her chin toward the back. She doesn't ask your name. She probably already knows it. You're handed a wax tablet with a list. The writing is hasty, the Latin borderline illegible. and one of the options involves honey, oysters, and a small ladder. You put it back down. Slowly. Fun fact, Romans didn't really have a word for love hotel, but they absolutely had. The concept, these little inns and cubicula, that's bedrooms, but let's not pretend anyone's sleeping, were rented by the hour or by the act. Some were tied to taverns, others were independent, and many were simply rooms inside larger homes that had flexible zoning laws. You're not alone in this venture. People are coming and going with the casual indifference of a city that's seen everything twice. A soldier with a toothpick tucked behind his ear, a woman in blue sandals who might be looking for her cloak, a man in a toga who is definitely not supposed to be here, judging by how he ducks every time someone sneezes nearby. The air grows thicker perfume, sweat, wine, candle wax, and the distant smell of bread. Maybe someone's baking, or maybe that's just your brain trying to comfort you. And then the curtain parts, and you step inside. But don't worry, we're just here to look. The curtain falls shut behind you with a soft whoosh, sealing out the noise of the Suburra, but not the scent that follows you in like a polite but persistent guest. Inside, everything feels slightly too warm, like someone lit one too many oil lamps and forgot to crack a window. The room is narrow, the ceiling low, and the walls are painted in fading shades of rust and brick red, designed, perhaps, to distract from the crumbling plaster or the very obvious lack of a fire exit. Your sandals whisper across the gritty floor as your eyes adjust. There's a wooden bench along one wall scarred from years of belts, backs, and maybe the occasional sword. A few clay amphorae are stacked in a corner, probably more for decoration than use. One has a painted dolphin. It feels like it's judging you. To your right, an elderly man with a face like cracked leather is refilling an oil lamp with practiced hands. He nods at you without speaking. Behind him, a hallway branches off more curtains, more mystery. This isn't the Lupana of Pompeii with its famously illustrated instructions on the wall. This is a smaller, quieter operation, more intimate, more awkward, probably cheaper. Historians still argue whether these urban love-ins functioned more like brothels, inns, or private homes that moonlighted in multitasking. The truth is likely yes. Rome's zoning laws weren't so much flexible as optional. Especially once you crossed into the Suburra, you shuffle forward, trying not to think about who else has walked here barefoot. The lamp wielder points toward a side room and mumbles something about the bed being warm. You thank him. You're not sure why. You peek in. It's a room, technically. There's a low cot plaster and brick under a thin straw mat. The pillow is a rolled-up tunic. On the wall hangs a faded fresco of Venus and Mars in an embrace that's about 60% anatomy and 40% artistic optimism. The oil lamp flickers weakly on a cracked ledge. It smells like burned olives. You sit on the edge of the cot, which groans in protest like it remembers every backache it's caused. There's a small wax tablet near the bed. Someone's carved a message into it. * Milo was here. He was brief. You snort. If you're wondering whether people in ancient Rome really rented love rooms by the hour, the answer is a deeply enthusiastic yes. In fact, rooms like this were common enough that graffiti survives all over Pompeii and other sites documenting the goings-on of people who didn't feel particularly shy about sharing details. Some of it reads like Yelp reviews, some reads like questionable poetry, and some just reads like drunk people with a stylus. You lie back. The ceiling has a small hole in it where a reed once hung, probably for ventilation. Now it's just a home for a very patient spider. It watches you. You watch it. A mutual agreement is formed. Just outside the curtain, you hear footsteps, someone murmuring, a short laugh, the sound of coins changing hands. You're part of the living city now, not the marble part, but the pulsing, sweating, giggling part that history books like to gloss over. Fun fact, wealthy Romans often had secret entrances built into the backs of these love-ins. The idea was that a senator could visit his favorite meretrix without being seen by his political rivals or worse, his wife. The entrances were narrow, hidden behind bakeries or laundry stalls, and occasionally shared with someone else's secret. A bell rings in the hallway, small and tinny, like the kind you'd use to call a servant or maybe startle a rat. Someone sighs loudly. A curtain rustles. You stay where you are, half listening, half hoping nobody pulls your curtain aside, asking to borrow the room early. And then, you notice the inscription on the wall, faint but legible in the lamp glow. It reads, Hic, Iaset, Sperius, non radit. Here lies Sperius, he did not return. You're not sure if that's a joke, a warning, or someone's idea of romance. Either way, you sit up a little straighter. You decide to step back out, your curiosity satisfied. Your sandals lightly dusted with mystery. The curtain sways as you re-enter the hallway. The old man offers you a fig. You decline. As you exit. Back into the Suburra, the air hits you like a sigh. Still warm, still loud, but with a breeze. Now someone's roasting pine nuts, and a group of musicians is warming up nearby, with what might generously be called a melody. You pause under a colonnade. The moon peeks through between rows of crooked rooftops. You think about what you just saw. Not scandalous, not glamorous, just human, messy, small, surprisingly organized. The thing is, most Romans didn't have much space for privacy at home. Apartment buildings in Sile were packed, noisy, and often shared between multiple families. So if you wanted time alone or time with someone, you rented it. For a few copper coins, a curtain, and a bed of questionable cleanliness, you bought a little silence in a city that never really stopped talking. You keep walking. A group of young women is arguing over a handful of silver rings outside a closed jewelry store. One holds up a ring and shouts, "He said it was real silver." Her friend cackles, "So is moonlight." As you pass a wine shop, a man stumbles out humming something about peaches. A mule tied to a lamppost gives you a deeply judgmental look. The night continues. Rome isn't sleeping. Not yet. But you're starting to feel the weight of the day, the stories, the smells, the stone cot. You find yourself wondering what it would be like to fall asleep here, in this city of corners and curtains, where every whisper has a name, and every alley hides a joke too old to explain. And somewhere in the distance, another curtain parts. Another story begins. The next morning, you wake to the chorus of early Rome. Mule carts creaking, hawkers yelling about olives with the urgency of war, and the low rhythmic slap of wet laundry against stone. You sit up slowly, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, and realize the sun is already painting the city gold. Somewhere nearby, someone's singing about figs and heartbreak. Standard Tuesday. You make your way through the back streets of the Suburra again, this time with sharper eyes. Not everything is what it looks like. A bakery might have a stairwell in the back that leads to a massage room. A tavern with suspiciously curtained booths may also rent time by the hour and not for napping. Welcome to the blurred lines of Roman lodging culture. Here's the thing. Ancient Rome didn't have hotels in the way we imagine them today. There were Caponians for the lower classes, tabernae shops that sometimes doubled as rooms, and diversoria more like upper-class vacation rentals. If you were a traveler, merchant, or just someone with amorous plans and no privacy at home, you didn't book a room. You slipped someone a coin and hoped the cot didn't collapse. Many of these spaces were run by former slaves or poor freed and offered food, wine, and lodging all under one roof. Convenient, unregulated, and usually very, very loud. You pass a small building with faded murals on the walls, painted women lounging beside wine jugs, one winking with artistic subtlety. A man in a grubby tunic leans against the doorway, chewing olives and nodding at you, as if to say, "Yes, it's exactly what you think." Historians still debate whether these places had licenses or, if licenses even mattered. What we do know is that Roman law was often performative. Prostitution was legal, technically taxable, and deeply embedded in the city's economy. But enforcement, spotty at best. You wander into another cupona, ducking past a hanging curtain, made from old wool scraps. The air inside is thick with last night's wine and this morning's ambition. A few men slump at tables, half asleep, while a wiry woman with arms like amphorae wipes down the counter. She raises an eyebrow. "Room, or drink?" You pause, just looking. She snorts. "That's what they all say." The back wall has several narrow doors, each with its own stylized carving above the lintel. One shows a laurel wreath, another has to fish. A third has, rather alarmingly, a man chasing a goose. You're not sure what that one costs. The floor here is trampled earth, and the ceiling sags in the middle where the tiles above have shifted over time. There's a small shrine tucked into one corner, dedicated to Mercury, the god of travelers, merchants, and liars. He's popular here. It's worth noting that in ancient Rome, everything was multi-purpose. A single room might host a dice game at dawn, a business deal by noon, and a romantic entanglement by dusk. Rooms were rented by the hour, by the activity, or just until someone else knocked. Privacy was a currency no one could afford for long. A boy walks by with a basket of flatbread, whistling a tune you swear you heard in a love poem once. He disappears into one of the side rooms. No one reacts. You back out of the Capona, return to the street. The sun's higher now, and the cobblestones have begun to shimmer. A line of soldiers in dusty leather greaves marches past, ignoring a vendor yelling about wine, vinegar, with all the sincerity of a funeral orator. You duck into a shadowed alley to escape the heat, and come across a different kind of inness, one marked with delicate white paint. Hospitium Lucilli, a woman's name. You step inside. It's quieter here, cooler, a little more respectable, or at least trying to be. The front room has a mosaic floor with an eye motif to ward off envy, or clients with bad intentions, and a brass incense burner, shaped like a dolphin. A young man with carefully oiled hair looks up from a ledger. Do you require a room? We offer fresh linen and privacy. You nod, more out of curiosity than need. He leads you down a tiled corridor, pausing to straighten a fig leaf mosaic that's starting to peel from age. At the end is a small chamber, polished floor, a raised sleeping bench with actual cushions, and a bowl of fresh herbs set under the window. There's even a basin of water, scented faintly with lavender and crushed barley. It's almost ... charming. As he leaves, he mutters, hourly rate posted by the door. You glance back. There it is, scratched into a wax tablet in neat Greek script. 1 denarius for 2 hours. Discount if you bring your own towel. You chuckle. Even the upscale joints had a sense of humor. Fun fact, Romans didn't typically sleep. In their brothels they went there for business, not leisure. Even the more luxurious establishments weren't hotels in the modern sense. There were no check-in desks, no privacy guarantees, and certainly no breakfast buffet. Back on the street, you pass a man standing in front of a public fountain, muttering poetry at a woman holding 3 pigeons. She nods once, pockets the coins he hands her, and disappears into a side door, marked only with the pine conifer, a subtle symbol for fertility, and occasionally just a pine cone. You stop at a tavern for a drink, spiced wine, served lukewarm in a chipped cup. The barkeep doesn't ask questions. He's seen everything, including you, maybe. You sip slowly, watching the street life unfold. A messenger brushing past a philosopher, a stray dog stealing a fig, a curtain swaying behind a door where someone probably just fell in love, or tripped over a chamber pot. The sun climbs, the city stirs, and you're learning that in ancient Rome, the line between a place to sleep and a place to do anything but was as thin as the curtain you just stepped behind. You'll lead now through the side alley, past a narrow stairwell and the lingering scent of overcooked lentils, into what the locals call the Hospitium Lucilli. It's one of those places that somehow smells of both rosewater and regret. The name's carved in a crooked wooden sign above the threshold, with little flourishes of paint, long faded. It's not the grandest of Roman inns, but it has its charm and, more importantly, privacy. The door opens with a soft creak, and you're immediately bathed in the warm glow of flickering oil lamps. Mosaic tiles chipped at the edges but once clearly expensive depict various mythological scenes. Venus with a dolphin, Bacchus reclining with a goblet. You suspect the selection of deities was not accidental. Lucilla, the innkeeper and namesake, appears from behind a beaded curtain, wiping her hands on an apron stained with wine and maybe a little rouge. She greets you with the look of someone who has seen it all, judged none of it, and overcharged for most of it. Her eyes scan you the way a hawk assesses a rabbit, not hostile, just professional. The room you're shown to is surprisingly cozy. A curtained alcove holds a low couch, covered in embroidered linens. There's a small table with a bowl of herbs, lavender, maybe hyssopand. A narrow window cracked just enough to let in the evening breeze. In one corner sits a water jug beside a shallow bronze basin. You touch it, still warm. Someone thought to heat the water. Points for effort. And there's music, faint and off-key, drifting up from the common room below. A lyre, maybe a flute. The notes are clumsy but earnest, played by someone who knows 3 songs and insists on performing all of them twice, but it works. It sets the mood. This isn't a brothel, not officially. Lucilla would tell you that straight-faced. We're an inn, she'd say, just with generous pillows. Yet something about the place tells you the pillows are far from the most generous part of the experience. The truth is, love hotels in ancient Rome didn't need to advertise. They lived in implication. A wink here, a slow pour of wine there, the red-dyed curtains, the scented oils. It was all part of the ambience. The fact that the doors had locks was just a helpful bonus. What made the Hospitium Lucili particularly special, though, was its clientele. It attracted a certain kind of patronaut, the rowdy legionnaire or drunken sailor. But the poet, the aspiring senator, the merchant who travelled light but carried heavy secrets, the kind who liked their trysts poetic, their wine tart, and their discretion airtight. Lucilla herself was a retired meretrix, one of the more esteemed, registered sex workers of the city, who turned to innkeeping when her knees gave up and her sarcasm sharpened. She ran the place with military precision. Towels folded, sheets changed, incense lit precisely to fingers before dusk. And then there were the wall carvings, in the quiet corners of the guest rooms, beneath the mosaics and behind curtain folds. Previous visitors had left behind little tributes, scratched hearts, names paired in Latin and sometimes Greek. Phrases like Felix was here, Flavia burns hotter than Vulcan's forge, and a particularly dramatic eye touched Eros and he bit back. You'd think Lucilla might discourage the graffiti. She doesn't. She calls it ambience. Fringe fact. Some of the oldest surviving graffiti in Rome comes from love-ins, just like this. And while the explicit stuff gets all the press, many of the messages are weirdly tender praise for a kind innkeeper. Thanks for a quiet night. Even impromptu poems carved with styluses, too blunt for precision but sharp enough for memory. You lie back now on the couch. The linen smells faintly of myrrh. The lamp flickers. From the next room, there's the unmistakable sound of laughter, followed by a hiccup, followed by silence. Someone fell asleep mid-affair. It happens more than you'd think. Historians still argue whether establishments like the Hospitium Lucili were primarily functional, meant for lodging and quick commerce, or if they also served as emotional sanctuaries, places where love, or something passing for it, was given space to bloom without judgment. You're inclined to believe the latter. Lucilla returns with a clay cup of pomegranate wine. She sets it down with a nod and vanishes again. No small talk, just service. You sip. It's sweet, with a tartness that catches the back of your throat. The kind of drink that makes confessions easier. Outside, the street noise dies down. Somewhere, a fruit vendor is calling in his last sale. A dog barks, then decides against it. Inside, the lamp wax burns low. You lie back, stare at the ceiling, and think about all the lives that have passed through this room, whispered in its shadows, laughed into its cushions, left behind nothing but the smell of perfume and a few poorly scratched names. And Lucilla, she'll remember none of them, or all of them. Depends on the tip. But before you get too cozy with your assumptions about how Roman love hotels operated, you might want to peek at the scrolls of Roman law, and then promptly toss them aside in mild frustration. Because here's the thing, while Rome was a city obsessed with laws, hundreds of them, inked onto tablets, etched in stone, shouted in forums when it came to love, lodging, and what went on behind closed curtains, the rules were more like very enthusiastic suggestions. You're standing now at the threshold of a Corpona, typical Roman, and technically a place for food, drink, and lodging. But wink once, and it's a brothel. Wink twice, and it's a gambling den. Officially, the law did not permit prostitution inside taverns or inns. But in reality, everyone from senators to street sweepers knew it happened, and so did the magistrates. They just chose, most of the time, to look the other way, unless someone truly made a spectacle. Historians still argue whether these semi-legal arrangements reflected a clever balancing act between moral posturing and economic necessity, or if the whole system was just an elaborate case of don't ask, don't tell in togas. Here's a fun twist: many love hotels, or inns with options, operated under the guise of offering full hospitality. The Latin word hospitium sounds innocent enough. It could mean a warm room, a friendly bed, or LB, an unusually friendly bed. If an establishment happened to provide company as well as cuisine, who was to say that wasn't just going above and beyond the call of innkeeping? Rome did try to draw lines, though. For example, sex workers were required to register under a special tax status known as meretrix, but inns, lodgings, they weren't taxed that way. So if an innkeeper wanted to avoid the stigma and expense of brothel registration, they'd simply say, "No, I just rent rooms. What happens in those rooms, that's not their responsibility." Not legally, definitely not morally. Let's move on now. Imagine being a local official, trying to enforce this hazy code of ethics. One moment, you're inspecting a cupona, and it's all olives and cheese platters. The next, you push aside a curtain and walk in on an awkward poet mid-seduction. Technically, that's a violation unless, of course, they're in love, because amant, or lovers, could claim the noble excuse of romantic passion, and loved nothing more than a good excuse rooted in classical virtue. Of course, this led to some creative interpretations of love. Patrons would sometimes declare themselves lovers the moment they were caught with someone under a vine-draped canopy. Not clients, not customers, just star-crossed fools overwhelmed by Venus herself. It sounds ridiculous, but remember this was a culture that had gods for nearly everything, including door hinges. If there's a loophole, Romans will crawl through it in sandals and claim divine inspiration. Let's not forget the symbolism. Many of these inns were adorned with imagery that nodded sometimes subtly, sometimes not to their extracurricular offerings. A carved shell here, a statue of Eros there, maybe a mosaic of Leda and the swan that seemed more mythological than practical, until you noticed the positioning. If you know, you know. Even the location of these establishments played into the legal and cultural dance. Love hotels rarely sat near the more respectable temples or civic centers. Instead, they nestled into the folds of the Suburra, the Transtiberim, or the edges of marketplaces, spaces already alive with noise, trade, and life's messier undercurrents, close enough to be convenient, but far enough to maintain plausible deniability. And yet, Rome wasn't entirely lazy. There were periodic crackdowns, especially during more pious reigns. Emperors like Augustus introduced Lex Julia, a series of moral laws designed to restore traditional Roman values. This included laws against adultery and even efforts to regulate public morality. Love hotels, understandably, had a tough time under those kinds of optics, but enforcement was wildly inconsistent. A crackdown might last a few months until some official remembered his favorite cupona also made incredible lentil stew and perhaps looked the other way. One particularly amusing case, Emperor Domitian once issued a decree limiting public performances of scandalous pantomimes, which, by the way, were often hosted in back rooms of taverns to entertain clients waiting for, let's call it, room service. The idea was that immoral entertainment would stop if the venues were more tightly regulated. The result? Traveling performers began disguising themselves as itinerant historians, which just proves that every generation has its loopholes and its very enthusiastic community. Theater kids. But despite the laws and their wobbly enforcement, the Roman love hotel flourished, not as an act of rebellion, but as an expression of human need and, let's be honest, human inventiveness. These places weren't about sin, they were about stories, affairs of the heart, the body, or both, all unfolding in the soft lamplight of a room. Someone paid 2 denarii to occupy for an hour. As you return to your inn, let's call it the Hospitium Lucilia, starting to appreciate the genius of it all. Lucilla herself is leaning on the counter, counting coins with one eye, while watching a young couple with the other. She says nothing, just offers them a pitcher of wine and a key. Hospitality, after all. Just don't ask what kind. You wake the next morning to the low hum of street chatter, the rustle of a broom brushing stone just outside your window, and the soft, almost reverent clink of clay cups being stacked in the common room. The Hospitium Lucili is stirring, but not yet fully awake. You stretch, vaguely aware that the scent of rosewater has been replaced by something a bit saltier, maybe grilled fish or the remnants of a garum spill in the alley. You sit up, pull on your tunic, and do what any self-respecting ancient Roman would do after a night in a love hotel. You try to piece together where the line lies between lodging house and brothel, and realize quickly that you may never find it, because here's the core of it. While places like Lucilla's Hospitium offered comfort, discretion, and a place to dream for the night, brothels, or lupinaria, were a whole different creature, and yet they often lived just one doorway away. The word lupinar itself comes from lupa, meaning she-wolf, a euphemism, of course, and not a terribly subtle one. These were places unmistakable in purpose. Their walls were painted with risk fresco, their rooms tiny, stone-walled, with hard beds and scratchy linen. But they were legal, official, taxed, and often, oddly enough, better documented than the inns. Historians still argue whether the distinction between brothel and inn really mattered to the people using them, to the state, maybe, to the priests, sometimes. But to a traveller with 2 denarii and a bottle of date wine, not so much. So what separated Lucilla's from the average brothel? It wasn't the services, necessarily. It was the experience. Brothels were efficient, transactional, and generally pretty bleak. Love hotels were atmospheric, candlelit, draped, full of stories. A brothel promised you release. A love hotel promised you illusion, maybe even romance. And honestly, that illusion is worth a lot. That doesn't mean brothels didn't have their charm. Some of the most famous were lavish, even themed. One particularly notorious example in Pompeii, long buried and then uncovered with a lot of blushing archaeologists, had wall paintings depicting every conceivable position, complete with helpful captions, like a menu. Customers could point to what they wanted. Convenient, especially after a bit too much Falernian wine. But let's not get distracted. You leave Lucilla's through the side door and wander down a narrow side street. Not far ahead is a 2-story building with a carved fig leaf above the doorway. No sign, no name, but the fig leaf is enough. A quiet queue. You pause, watch. A man enters. A woman leaves. Their eyes don't meet. This too is a brothel, but one with softer lighting and an exit leading not to the main street, but into a little herb garden out back. Discretion, always. Rome, by now, has built a whole ecosystem of such spaces. Love hotels and brothels don't compete, they coexist, feed each other, borrow staff, borrow clients, borrow soap. That it's said that some merittresses, once they had a good reputation and regular clientele, would operate out of both renting rooms in inns like Lucilla's for their more elite customers, and working in licensed brothels during festivals or saturnalia. It was about flexibility, hustle, and a little bit of myth-making. You find yourself in a bathhouse now, not one of the massive imperial complexes, but a smaller, neighborhood affair, the kind where people come to wash, gossip, and pretend they aren't listening to the 2 senators loudly discussing grain prices 3 feet away. Here, too, you find the overlap. Some bathhouses had private rooms attached. Cubicular, technically, they were for rest. Realistically, they were for FAR, rest of another sort. If the mood struck and the fee was fair, there's a certain fragrance in the amber and lavender. Maybe a whisper of musk. Someone's brought their own oils. You smile, always the mark of a regular. Back on the street, you pass a man selling fried cheese wrapped in fig leaves. He winks at a passing woman, who ignores him completely. He winks again. It doesn't go better. You chuckle. Then you notice something that stops you in your tracks. A girl, no more than 15, stands in the doorway of another inn. Her eyes are painted. Her robe is cut deliberately crooked to show a shoulder. She doesn't smile, just stares. You look away quickly, not because you're shocked, but because you realize something sobering. Not every love hotel was about love. Not every tryst was wanted. Not every story here ends with laughter and wine. It's a darker part of Roman history and one worth remembering. Rome legalized slavery, and many of the lupi working in brothels were enslaved. Even those working in inns like Lucilla's, if they weren't legally bound, often had little choice. Economic pressure, lack of family, debts, all roads that led to a curtained booth with a stranger on the other side. And still, they painted their eyes, burned rosewood, sang when they weren't crying. Rome made space for every kind of desire, but not always for the people behind it. You turn back toward the Suburra, your steps a little slower now. The streets are busier, merchants shouting, bakers sweating, and in the doorway of Hospitium, Lucilli, a woman leans against the frame with a smile that says, "Come in, or don't. I'm paid either way." You're starting to see how blurred the line really is, and how, sometimes, the real difference between a brothel and a love hotel isn't in the marble or the mosaics, it's in whether someone waits behind the curtain with hope, or simply habit. Now the door closes behind a discreet whisper of fabric, and the air shifts again. This time, it's not the creak of wooden beams, or the brush of footsteps in the hallway. It's aroma, and not just any aroma, but one meticulously layered by centuries of cultural obsession. Perfumed. Roman love hotels didn't just rely on wine and candlelight to set the mood. They used scent like a sculptor used clay. You blink, slowly. The room smelled like something between honey-drenched myrtle and the fleeting edge of saffron, a gentle whisper of cardamom, perhaps a touch of civet, though you're not quite ready to guess whether it's from the blend or someone's cloak. Either way, the effect is disarming. Perfume wasn't just decoration, in Romette was declaration, who you were, where you'd been, what you could afford, even how long you intended to stay. You move past a burnished bronze brazier where coils of incense thread the air like flirtatious ghosts. The perfumed environment of these inns, sometimes called copone, odorata, by modern scholars, as a kind of olfactory theatre, not only to please the senses, but to mask the less glamorous truths, the scent of mildew behind the walls, the damp breath of shared bathwater, the traces of prior guests still lingering on the linen. Historians still argue whether these perfumes were mostly personal or communal, that is, brought in by guests or supplied by the inn itself. But archaeological residues suggest that many such establishments invested heavily in in-house aromas, not just for ambience, but for branding. One particular tavern near Pompeii's Stabian Gate was reportedly so fragrant with spikenard and cinnamon that it earned the nickname the nose room on local graffiti. Subtle, the Romans were not. You drift toward the shelf. There, nestled between a lacquered bowl and a folded linen sash, is a tiny amphora no larger than your thumb. It's sealed with a wad of beeswax and tied with a crimson thread. Inside, probably, myrrh-infused almond oil, a saffron blend known as krasenum, favored by high-end courtesans and dramatic poets. Want to know if someone's paying? Smelled their wrists. Krasenum was expensive. 2 drops could cost more than the lamp oil for the whole in fringe detail. Some perfumed blends were more than just mood enhancers. Certain temple cults, particularly those devoted to Venus or Isis, believed that scent could function as an offering or a magical veil, something that softened reality just enough to let the divine peek through. So yes, when someone dabbed on their lotus blend before a date, they may have been aiming to impress and summon minor favor from the goddess of love. You recline slightly on the divan, pressing your palm against the scent-warmed wall. The clay still holds heat from the day, radiating just enough comfort to relax your bones. The aroma shifts again, faint now, and resinous, like frankincense that's given up trying to impress you, but still lingers out of habit. There's an oil jar near the basin, its neck cracked but still functional. You open it, slowly, and what greets you is the ghost of rosewater, layered over bitter mint, and a bass note that smells unmistakably like ambition. The Romans used every trick in the book: rose to invite, myrrh to deepen, cedar to calm, costus, root if you wanted to make a statement, and civet or musk if you didn't mind raising a few eyebrows and possibly starting a war. Some blends were personal, signatures handed down like recipes or love letters. Others were popular enough to be replicated by workshop perfumers from Syria, Egypt, or Anatolia. And still others were whispered about in private circles, usually with a phrase like, "Don't wear that unless you mean it." There's even mention, in Pliny's Natural History, of a blend known as susanam, a thick, lotus-heavy oil so potent that it stained tunics for days and could be smelled across a crowded atrium. Not ideal for subtle affairs, but perfect if you needed to send a message to an ex across the banquet table. Perfume also carried logistical roles. In a love hotel, it helped to designate occupied spaces, scented lamps versus clean ones, bay leaf burners. It was also used as a soft way to say, you may want to freshen up first, without, starting a fight. Of course, it wasn't all glamour and myrrh. Some establishments cut their scents with vinegar, old wine, or even ash in a desperate attempt to stretch supply. You can smell the difference. Trust me. And then, there's the human element. You lean back against the cushion and smile slightly. Somewhere in this very room, a young couple probably once argued over whether the pine oil was too strong. Someone spilled ambergris on a borrowed tunic. Someone else stole a perfumed sachet as a souvenir. And maybe, just maybe, someone left behind a vial of something rare, something handmade and never replicated on purpose. A parting gift, a quiet goodbye. You inhale once more. The scent wraps around your head like a ribbon, soft and invisible. Outside, you hear the faint clang of a bronze cup against a tray. Somewhere, someone's laughing. And here, in this perfumed cocoon, you float, relaxed, curious, slightly enchanted, and still wondering if that note of cinnamon was ever really in the oil, or just a memory from a long-forgotten night. The candle wavers, the walls hold their breath, And now that your nose has acclimated to the perfume haze, you begin to notice something else, something often overlooked in dry museum texts, and even drier Latin poetry. The sensory language of a Roman love hotel wasn't just in what you saw or smelled. It was in the sound of skin against linen, in the bite of spiced wine, in the texture of goose-feathered mattresses that were only kind of filled with actual goose feathers. You run your fingers across the carved edge of the bench beneath you. It's smooth, but not perfectly so. Tiny nicks remain where someone dropped a ring, or carved their name, or stabbed a fig pit a little too enthusiastically. Every surface here is gently tired, used, lived in, which is exactly what gives it its charm. Love hotels in ancient Rome weren't sterile affairs. They were loud, messy, crowded places, trying very hard to look elegant. And if you were lucky or rich, you could actually find one that succeeded. The curtains rustle slightly, revealing a fresco. And yes, it's one of those frescoes popular in these establishments were images known as picturi amatoria, erotic frescoes painted directly onto the plaster walls. Some were tasteful, some were anatomical, some were basically ancient Roman meme panels. This one shows a pair of lovers reclining on a purple-draped couch, their poses both exaggerated and surprisingly natural. There's a tray of fruit in the corner, and someone's dropped a sandal mid-frolic. The artist signed it with a flourish and what looks like a tiny amphora doodle. Classic. Now, you may be wondering, were these pictures guides, menus, warnings? Historians still argue whether erotic art in Roman inns was meant to arouse, instruct, or simply entertain. What's clear is that it served some function beyond decoration. We have records of travelers choosing specific rooms based on the images painted inside. Give me the one with the flute player and the silk ropes, someone might have said, casually, while paying the room fee in cestus's and fig rolls. And the sounds. Ah yes, the acoustic environment of a Roman inn was never truly silent. There's the trickle of a fountain in the courtyard, placed not just for cooling but for white noise, the clatter of ceramic cups being stacked in the hallway, the soft thump of someone bumping into a linen-draped doorway. You shift on the mattress. Underneath is a layer of crushed straw wrapped in dyed wool. If you press your palm against it, you can feel the faint rustle of chaff. It's not uncomfortable, just ... rustic. Some innkeepers took pride in their fabrics. You'll find beds covered in lintiman purpury, purple-dyed linens, though only if the client was worth the expense. Others, they went with the functional route. Scratchy wool, washed in river water, dried in the sun, occasionally shared with beetles. You take your chances. Let's not forget food. A real Roman rendezvous wasn't complete without a platter of snacks. Honeyed dates, soft cheese, cold olives in a clay dish, so oily it could double as a moisturizer. There might be figs stuffed with peppered nuts, or, if the mood struck bold, some fried dormice dusted with poppy seeds. Yes, dormice, crunchy, weirdly popular, and considered very romantic if your date wasn't squeamish. And the wine. Oh, the wine, sipped from shallow cups, spiced with everything from cinnamon to crushed rose petals. It wasn't just a beverage, it was foreplay. The innkeeper might have brought it warm in winter, chilled with snow in summer, and always in quantities that suggested judgment was optional. One quirky practice worth mentioning: some love hotels included something like a complimentary mood basket. Not fruit, not towels, but little trays of oils, salves, even edible pastes. Some might have been aphrodisiacs, others just mouth-numbingly minty. There's a record of one concoction called Amorium papaverum, said to combine poppy, honey, and goat bile. The exact effect is debated. The aftertaste, probably unforgettable. You run your fingers through the air, just above the oil lamp. Not close enough to burn, just to feel the heat, the vibration of flame holding steady. This room has absorbed so many hours of longing, awkwardness, laughter, negotiation, exhaustion, and yes, genuine tenderness. You wonder how much of it lingers in the floorboards. You're not alone in this room, by the way. Shamelessly eavesdropping from a stone niche is a small clay figurine of Venus. She's painted with long faded ochre, her hand raised in what might be a blessing or a warning. Beneath her is an offering dish, empty, save for 2 withered bay leaves and a tiny twist of linen soaked in something sweet-smelling, possibly fig oil, possibly someone's last-ditch effort to summon romance. Some historians believe that guests left these little tokens hoping for good luck, or better stamina, or fewer interruptions. There were even whispered rumors of Venus blessing unions that began in rooms like this, especially if they included her likeness in the act. Debatable. Absolutely. Charming. You bet. So now you sit, you sip, you breathe in the layered air. The lamp flickers again, casting shadows that sway gently on the wall, like dancers caught mid-spin. You can still hear laughter outside, probably from the shared courtyard, where someone's either celebrating or tripping over a cat. Inside, though, the tone is different, slower, quieter. This is the part of the night when everything softens, not just voices, but edges. Time dilates, stretches, curls around you like warm oil in a chilled bowl, and you're still tucked in this room with your sandals off and your curiosity piqued. Begin to understand why Rome built entire industries around this kind of night. Not for passion, but for possibility. The candle has nearly burned down now, but you can still make out the shape of a doorway across the room, the one leading to the staff quarters. You weren't supposed to notice that, but you did, because while Roman love hotels may have been known for silk sheets, spicy wine, and murals of improbable contortion, none of it worked without the people behind the curtain, the ones who made it smell like luxury, feel like comfort, and run like a well-oiled amphora. Let's start with the host, Coppo or Leno, depending on whether the establishment leaned more toward romance or profit. This was the face of the operation, the one who welcomed you in with a well-rehearsed smile and calculated exactly how much to charge you based on your sandals, your cloak, and whether or not you arrived holding hands or fighting. They were half innkeeper, half bouncer, and possibly a retired gladiator with a flair for scented candles. But the real magic, that came from the attendants. You'd spot them by the smell before you saw them: lavender, vinegar, sweat, and something faintly herbal. They handled everything, changing linens, heating water, restocking oil jars, calming goats, and once, according to one surviving anecdote, rescuing a senator stuck in a decorative urn. Never ask why he was in there. These workers rarely spoke much, but their efficiency was legendary. They moved through love hotels like ghosts with checklists. Some carried little trays of snacks. Others knew exactly when to knock and when to not knock. And yes, there was almost always a dedicated perfumer. Now, we're not talking about a fancy gilded artist with an ivory pestle and a line of clients stretching to the forum. No, these were humble workers, often women, usually old enough to know every herb trick in the book, and young enough to outrun a collapsing oil shelf. They blended on site, quick, intuitive, messy. You might walk in needing something sweet but not desperate, and walk out smelling like a cinnamon-drenched pomegranate with hints of crisis management. Perfume wasn't just a luxury. It was theater, camouflage, a survival mechanism. And the right scent could make someone forget that the bed creaked, the wine had raisins, and the curtain rod just fell on your head. Oh, and entertainers. Yes, really, some upscale Roman inns employed lute players, flute girls, dancers, even amateur poets if you were unlucky. They might perform in the atrium during meals, or if requested, follow you inside and awkwardly sing while you tried to impress your date with olives and coin tricks. One fringe record mentions an inn in Capua where guests could request background music in the style of a doomed romance. The most popular tune was reportedly a slow lament played on a goat horn flute. Historians still argue whether this was serious or satire. Either way, the goat probably hated it. Let's not forget the scribes. You didn't think people went through all this trouble without someone taking notes, did you? In some elite establishments, discreet scribes documented guest preferences, blend combinations, and in one case, dramatic exit quotes. There's a clay tablet fragment found near Ostia, listing what appears to be a guest's requested room scent: lavender, musk, saffron, but only if the window faces east. That's very specific, but also incredibly human. And then there's Shamhat. Okay, not literally, but every inn had a Shamhat, an all-purpose helper who did too much, got paid too little, and held the whole place together through a mix of sarcasm, herbal knowledge, and terrifying competence. She might prep your tea, mop your floor, discreetly replace your pillow, and solve a guest argument using only a fig and a threatening eyebrow. You could always tell when she was off duty. That's when everything fell apart. In many ways, these love hotels weren't just for guests. They were sanctuaries for the staff, too, a place where daily rituals mattered, where folding a sheet just so could be its own kind of prayer, where mixing perfume for a stranger who'd never remember your name still felt like you'd offered something sacred. One quirky fact: some staff members wrote poems on the backs of invoice slates. Love poems, longing poems, rude jokes involving goats. These were never meant for clients. They were for each other, scratched in wax, hidden under cots, forgotten in the bustle. Archaeologists have found fragments of them. My favorite, a line that reads, "You smell like cardamom and poor choices, I'd still choose you." You chuckle, even now, and then you glance at the doorway again. Behind it, someone's probably refilling a lamp, smoothing a sheet, crushing a dried blossom between thumb and palm to test for potency. They won't be remembered in scrolls or speeches, but you'd notice if they were gone. So next time you hear someone wax poetic about ancient Rome's architecture, or politics, or military tactics, smile politely. Then ask them what they know about the woman who rethreaded curtains at midnight after a senator's cloak got stuck. Spoiler, they won't, but you will. And as the candle finally gutters out, and the scent of oil and marjoram lingers in the warm hush, you think maybe that's the point. You're reclining against a cushion in the dim atrium corner when a traveling poet takes the stage, lyre in hand, drawing notes that tangle with the scent of myrtle blooms. You might think this is romantic, until his voice cracks in the middle of a love verse one he apparently forgotten. The echo reverberates off the tiled walls, like a goat bleat drowned out by a trumpet. You chuckle, partly from amusement, partly from the oversweet perfume on the napkin someone slipped under the vocalist's hand. Historians still argue whether these performers were part of the inn's official staff, or freelance romantics passing out handwritten odes. One mainstream fact: by the 1st century CE, many inns in Pompeii and Rome advertised live entertainment as a draw, complete with wine and scented oil packages that appeared on wax tablets alongside room rates. And then there's the curious side: accented an attendant wafts incense in front of clients to divine mood or fate. Some fringe sources claim these readings included peering through the smoke to see an omen of earwax, though that might just be innkeeper humor. Either way, it was theatrical. Lavender smoke, interpreted as tranquility ahead, while a sudden spicy clove aroma meant you'll argue with family soon and win. You're halfway through a warming cup of spiced wine when you catch a familiar figure drifting through the crowd. Shamat, that ghostly anchor of practicality, balancing a tray with small clay bowls of urban-fused oil and rosevine honey. She offers a dip to an unsure senator who sniffs and blinks before nodding in approval. You smirk, even amid the drama of love, politics, and poetry. Shamhearts.com presence has the power to make or break the mood. She's a walking reminder that in these shadowed places, the heart might lead the party, but scent and timing are the real puppeteers. A heated exchange erupts near the fountain. When a merchant accuses his traveling companion of stealing a fig, the host strides in, calm and commanding, offering a generous swipe of chamomile balm to cool tempers and a discreet vial of calming oil. Requested not by the Arctic guest, but by his more level-headed partner, it diffuses the tension, literally and aromatically. The host leans in, murmuring in the senator's ear, and soon they're laughing about something involving cucumbers and spilled wine. Amid all this, there's a quiet debate taking place. Tables whisper whether love hotels were purely practical establishments, or if they cultivated a culture of personal branding. Yes, even personal scent branding. One side points to archaeological finds of graffiti praising sweet oil and sweeter nights in Herculaneum. The other side insists that texts praising fragrant intimacy were meant metaphorically, not literally. You tilt your head. Maybe. You'll never know for sure. But the ambiguity doesn't bother you. You notice another curious figure, a scribe sketching the scene on a wax tablet, carefully capturing Shamhat's calm expression as she serves honey wine. That tablet will probably be reused. Wax tablets were expensive, but the burnt incense dust stuck in the grooves might just preserve the aroma in the clay memory. That's your poetic version of historical preservation right there. Behind the scenes, the perfumer-in-chief wheels out a small charcoal brazier and begins to toast sugar around a copper bowl, coaxing caramel notes into the air. Guests inhale. Appreciatively, it's unexpected, but clever. Something sugar-honeyed to wind down after spicy love duels and dramatic poetry. One fringe tip: the mixture was believed to ignite desire and appetite, making it a multifunctional blend. Historians still argue whether this sugar toasting trick was widespread, or just a clever local innovation. You lean forward and take a mindful breath-spiced wine. Lavender incense, honey toast aroma, and faint citrus from the fountain flowers all layered together. It feels crafted, intentional, and oddly comforting. You realize that this place, with its mismatched sandals, broken lyres, dramatic declarations, and Shamhat's mellow professionalism, is a living tapestry of human rhythm. Perform, soothe, provoke, repeat. As a bard begins another verse, this time with slightly better vocal control, you sip the last of your wine and think. We romanticize temples, emperors, legions, but it's this messy, scented, communal patchwork of staff, poets, innkeepers, scent mixers, and slightly tipsy clients that truly defines the Roman experience. And yes, you probably didn't survive this bit of history, but you sure appreciated the atmosphere while you lasted. You step through the velvet hush of the Love Hotel's inner room and blink into the quiet, golden candlelight just in time to catch a glimpse of something peculiar in the back courtyard. Past the tiled basin, over a wall topped with curling vines and prayer cloths, you see a stone relief glinting in moonlight. It's unmistakable, the winged figure of Venus, goddess of love and, well, everything currently happening within these walls. You're not in a temple, not technically, but in ancient Rome. Those lines blur more than you'd think. The proximity between places of pleasure and spaces of piety wasn't just geographically, it was cultural, sometimes even spiritual. Many of Rome's love hotels sat nestled near shrines, or minor temples. Some even shared walls. One in just south of the Palatine had a dedicated altar to Fortuna Virilis, the womanly luck goddess. Women would light a small offering before their appointment, hoping for beauty, success, or simply discretion. The boundary between sacred and salacious wasn't as clear-cut as you might imagine. In fact, historians still argue whether these overlaps were pragmatic, ironic, or completely intentional. You imagine the innkeeper nodding at you as you pass back through the atrium. Maybe he started his day lighting incense to Venus, Clotsiana, the goddess of both love and sewers. Practical, poetic, and a little pungent. Inside many of these establishments, you find subtle nods to the divine. Not just Venus, but Priapus, not so subtle fertility god with an exaggerated portfolio. His statues often stood by thresholds or hung from doorposts, not just for giggles, but as warding charms. Protection against envy, bad luck, unwanted interruptions, or maybe just bad vibes. There's something tender, even hopeful, in the notion that lovers and strangers alike would whisper little prayers as they crossed a perfumed threshold. You imagine fingers trailing over a carved stone offering bowl, a muttered line of poetry, a promise made under breath and olive oil. Now, before you think this turned Rome's love hotels into religious sites, slow your sandals. There were tensions, especially from more conservative thinkers. Some Roman moralists and Stoic senators wrinkled their noses at this mix of lust and liturgy. Temples were supposed to be for sacrifice and ritual, not a post-coital wine break. Yet here you are, watching a visiting merchant leave a sprig of laurel in a clay bowl beside a torchlit Venus bust. Was it superstition? A genuine devotional gesture? A subtle attempt to bless the outcome of his evening? Rome thrived on contradiction, and its gods, especially the more domestic, intimate ones, didn't stay put in marble sanctuaries. They followed people, into bedrooms, into rented rooms with red curtains and rose petals on the floor. One scroll fragment, scribbled hastily in vulgar Latin, records a couple praying to Venus, a Richtian mid-encounter. That's right, mid. As if divine assistance might help secure a better outcome. Imagine that awkward moment. Oh, divine one. No, not you. Keep going. Yeah, I meant Venus. And it wasn't just couples. Some inns included shrines tended by staff. The perfumer's alcove often held offerings of myrrh and saffron, placed beside rough little statues, their features half worn by steam and handling. When you ask the young server sweeping by if she knows who tends the shrine in the laundry courtyard, she shrugs. Sometimes us, sometimes her. She nods toward the old linen lady. She says it keeps the moths and men in line. It wasn't all benign blending, though. Some hotels tried to capitalize on religious festival traffic, especially during Venus's feast days or rites of Flora, the goddess of spring, and, let's be honest, unbottled joy. Prices soared, rooms filled, and let's just say not everyone's prayers were answered with grace. Others accused these places of sacrilege. One senator famously tried to close a row of inns near the Capitoline Hill, arguing that their candle smoke interfered with temple incense. More likely, he just didn't like what his son was doing in room 7. Historians love to pick over whether these overlaps were acts of reverence or acts of resistance. Was it about finding sanctuary in the only form of power some people had, especially the enslaved, the poor, or the otherwise invisible? Or was it cheeky Roman humor, pitting divine names next to earthly pleasures in a wink-wink sort of architecture? Either way, you can't deny the sensory power of the scene. You sit now on a tiled bench outside the steamy atrium. Behind you, the distant chanting of a midnight rite from a temple up the hill. Before you, the rustle of silk, the soft laugh of a departing client, the faint scrape of a stylus marking a guest ledger. A light breeze curls in, and with it burnt laurel, oil of rose, crushed cinnamon bark, and a breath of something you can't quite name. Is that myrrh from a ritual fire, or someone's new perfume? You lean back, exhale slowly, and realize something odd. In this city where temples rise beside taverns, where love and incense blur at the edges, even the gods seem to shrug and say, "Let people live." You don't have to walk far before the atmosphere shifts. One moment you're basking in the soft glow of perfumed oil lamps and giggling acolytes, and the next, well, you're standing in a shadow, a little colder than it should be, because, for all the satin cushions, incense cones, and frescoed flirtation, Roman love hotels weren't always about love, or even fun. They were also about money, power, need, and sometimes coercion. You glance toward a side alley behind a tavern. The back entrance has no mosaic, no velvet curtain, just a warped wooden door, scuffed from too many boots. That's where some of the darker stories begin. Historians still argue whether these spaces were technically brothels or just inns with amenities, but semantics don't change the reality. Rome had locha, but laws are only as strong as the coin in your purse or the name on your birth tablet. Take the girls brought in from the provinces. Not slaves, not officially, but bound by debt, desperation, or a wink from a powerful man. A merchant's ward, a senator's gift, a performer who owed the innkeeper for room and board. They had perfume rubbed on their necks, and prices whispered in their ears. Not all of them wanted to be there. Many couldn't leave. You step inside one of the back rooms now. The walls are faded. There's no fresco of Venus here, just a peeling panel of a ship, sails full, maybe symbolizing escape. The cot is narrow. The air smells of stale wine and worn-out lavender. This place, like so many, catered to both choice and constraint. And yet, right next door, you might find a soldier returning from campaign who spent a month's pay for a night of music and softness. He's not cruel, just lonely. He brings a carved charm, a rosewater cake, and asks the girl her real name before kissing her fingers. In another room, a pair of students recite Ovid while sharing dates dipped in honey. They giggle through verses, legs entwined, the lamp flickering against the bronze mirror. It's all happening under the same roof. Rome doesn't divide its pleasures and poisons cleanly. You sit now beside an empty amphora with a cracked inscription, Donum Amores, gift of love. Someone once dedicated this jar to their companion, possibly a courtesan, possibly a free woman, possibly both. The lines blur. One little-known fact. Wealthy clients could pay a cura amatoria, a sort of love manager who arranged visits, crafted gifts, and ensured the girl or boy in question had the right poetry, jewelry, and conversation topics. An entire economy built around packaging intimacy. Of course, not everyone was a buyer, and not every encounter was dignified. Sometimes a drunken brawl ended with the girl bruised and unpaid. Other times a noblewoman, veiled and incognito, spent an hour with a low-born lute player and left behind a ring. The extremes coexisted. They always did. You peek into a narrow hallway. A scribe is being paid in olives to compose a love poem. The recipient stands behind a curtain, waiting, hopeful. Maybe tonight this ends in connection. Maybe it's just another coin. Nowhere is this confusion more evident than in the graffiti. Love hotels, like brothels, were full of scribbled verses, some romantic, some crude, some weirdly poetic. She touched my wrist, and I lost 3 years of my life. Antonius smells like figs and betrayal. Fortuna, bring me back to her eyes, just once. They're all still there. etched into stone, scratched into plaster. Human need doesn't age well, but it lingers. And what about those who worked here by choice? They existed too. Courtesans who trained in music, philosophy, and fragrance. Boys who practiced posture and flirtation like an art. Women who kept notebooks of clients who tipped, who lied, who cried. Some were clever, some were trapped. Many were both. There's a soft knock on the frame behind you. An older woman, in a plum-colored robe, gestures toward the door. "You done reminiscing?" she asks, half smiling. "It's nearly festival week. We need the room." You nod, stepping out. Because the story never pauses. New guests arrive. New games begin. And whether it's love, longing, loneliness, or just a need to feel something for a night, there's always someone knocking. Always. Someone waiting behind the curtain. You step out into the midnight hush of a narrow Roman lane, ducking past a linen-draped balcony where incense drifts lazily into the street. The revelry tonight isn't ordinary. The rhythm of the city's pleasure quarter has picked up a different pulse, slower, heavier, almost ceremonial, because when an emperor sponsors the party, everything changes. Imperial patronage. Two words that, in Rome, mean excess, sprinkled with legitimacy. You follow the flickering path of oil lamps toward a particular domicile Villa Turndorf hotel, temporarily leased to the palace. The walls here are cleaner, the mosaics newer. Outside, a statue of Venus has been garlanded with bay and jasmine. There's a listless bodyguard asleep under it, his breath smelling faintly of raisins and politics. Inside, oh, it's a different world. Golden silk curtains, musicians behind latticework, cupbearers pouring wine dyed blue with crushed violets. And sitting at the center, surrounded by cushions and well-dressed companions, is the emperor's cousin. Or maybe it's his lover. Or maybe, as historians still argue, this particular emperor simply liked hosting intimate gatherings for the sake of performance, politics, and plausible deniability. Because in Rome, pleasure was also a form of control. Love hotels became theaters. One night, you might find a powerful senator humiliated in a game of dice, his tunic swapped for a dancer's veil. Another, a general might receive a whisper in his ear that changes a campaign's fate. Pillow talk, in this setting, could shift alliances. Laughter could mask betrayal. The caress of a perfumed hand could be a signal, and don't think it was. All spontaneous, some of these affairs were staged down to the minute. Guests were chosen like chess pieces. The scent of the room ambergris, saffron, a bit of warm resin was curated. Courtesans were briefed. Eavesdroppers were planted. You wander through a side room where incense smoke curls like gossip around a marble basin. A young poet is reading, verses that sound tender, but if you listen closely, they're coded insults toward a rival faction. The audience tuts, but no one stops him, because if the emperor likes it, it's not slander, it's art. Did Nero use love hotels to manipulate rivals? Maybe. Did Domitian stage morality checks in disguised inns? Possibly. Was Hadrian's Circle rumored to host elaborate scent-tasting evenings with musical contests and soft-voiced philosophy? Oh, definitely. Historians disagree on how deliberate it all was, but records remain papyrus scraps detailing which blend was served at which gathering, who sat beside whom, which fruit was offered when, and a lot of those gatherings happened right here, in places dressed up as pleasure houses, but functioning as whisper parlors for empire. And when the emperor himself came, forget subtlety. They say Caligula once threw a nighttime feast inside a Brothelton Palace annex. Guests were invited for study. No scrolls were unrolled, but the performances, let's just say someone played the flute with their toes, and still got a magistrate promotion the next morning. Even Augustus, Mr. Morals himself, is rumored to have quietly subsidized inns that served veterans returning from campaign. For their restoration, he claimed. Historians still argue whether that meant muscle salves or emotional balm in the arms of a cheerful companion named Marcia. Tonight, you watch a slender boy light a scented lamp, frankincense, honey, and something smoky, possibly vetiver. A woman enters, her eyes outlined in kohl, her fingers heavy with rings. She smiles at you briefly, not seductively, politely, professionally, because here, roles are clear. Everyone knows what's being traded, and everyone pretends they don't. The emperor's cousin raises a glass. 2 secrets, he says, voice honeyed and sharp. They never smell too strongly. Laughter. Music swells. You slip out the side door, sandal soles quiet on the marble. You know now what power smells like. Not gold, not sweat, but something in between, an aroma composed of lies, longing, and the faintest edge of fear. You're still breathing in the tail notes of last night's perfume amber. Crushed fig leaf, maybe a touch of regret when the city begins to whisper in a different language, not with lips, but with ink, papyrus, poetry, gossip, etched into eternity. Rome doesn't just do love hotels, Rome writes about them. You wander a shaded colonnade just outside the Suburra, parchment in hand. It's not official business, it's Petronius, or what's left of him. His Satyricon survives, only in tantalizing fragments, but those fragments are enough to paint you a picture of innuendo, and unfortunate dinner parties that somehow always involve a perfumed guest fainting into oysters. Inside the poem, someone's always falling for someone they shouldn't. Someone's always pretending the room smells like roses when it actually smells like goat. Ovid's no better. The man practically wrote the instruction manual for urban flirtation. His Ars Amatoria advises readers on where to loiter, how to dress, and yes, which love hotels are the most obliging. Do not underestimate the importance of a soft cushion, he writes, practically winking through the centuries. But he wasn't joking. You pass a street vendor hawking scrolls. One is illustrated badly, with a crude sketch of a woman reclining beside a basin. The title translates loosely to the courtesan of the candled corner. You suspect it's not entirely fictional, because here's the thing. The love hotels may have been ephemeral, but the literature, the rumors, the graffiti, those stuck. They're scrawled on the walls of Pompeii. Successus loves Iris. One message reads, I hope your heart explodes. Another nearby. At Nietzsche's Inn, you'll find warmth and legs. You chuckle. Historians still argue whether these verses were genuine confessions or performance. Art, maybe both. Roman humor lived in the space between absurdity and confession. Take Martial, for instance. His epigrams describe everything from hairy innkeepers to what he claims was a haunted love room near the Aventin. Was he mocking the elite? Probably. Was he describing real places? Also probably. The funny thing is, some of those jabs, pointed couplets and innuendos are the only surviving records of certain establishments. The brick walls are dust now, but the gossip immortal. You step into a tablinum, small archive of scrolls maintained by an amateur scholar who moonlights as a perfumer's assistant. She shows you a faded palimpsest, scratched faintly in the margins a phrase in vulgar Latin, oleum flammi, oil of flame. She tells you it was a nickname for a certain blend used in love rooms, scented with cinnamon, ginger, and a whisper of benzoin, spicy, volatile, and terribly prone to setting curtains on fire. She notes casually. You smile. That checks out. You make your way back to your workshop, passing a quiet alcove where someone has carved a tiny verse into the plaster. Asterisk, in this room, I lost a coin and found a lover. Both were slippery. Asterisk, you think it might be your favorite line so far, because Roman writing didn't always aim for legacy. Sometimes it just wanted to capture a night, a scent, a shared joke under a flickering lamp. The historians might argue about sources, authorship, dating, but you just want to know what they meant. You reach your bench, still faintly sticky with last night's myrrh. You uncork a jar, sniff carefully. Someone once described this scent in a scroll, not with chemistry, but with poetry. They said it smelled like first kisses after lies. You get that, and suddenly, you're no longer in the past. You're in it. Ink and oil, desire and documentation, scandal and sandalwood, all in one lingering breath. It's still early, but the city feels like it's been up for hours, because today is not just any day. Today is a festival day. That means everything smells louder. There's a kind of anticipation thickening the air, and you know it has very little to do with incense, and everything to do with what the Romans did best: celebration and chaos. Frequently at the same time, you can smell the honeyed wine being poured before breakfast. Somewhere in the distance, someone is already playing a flute too enthusiastically. It is, as they say, the beginning of the end. Welcome to Saturnalia. You step out into the street, and already it's different. Toga fastenings are crooked, wreaths are askew. Servants are riding on litters while their masters walk behind, pretending not to be annoyed. It's part of the tradition. Reversal, indulgence, controlled madness. The rules loosen like half-untied sandals, and the city leans into its chaotic glee with both arms. And where, you might ask, do people go when the polite surface of society dissolves into merriment and mistletoe-grade flirting? That's right, straight to the love hotels. Rooms are fully booked. The most enterprising innkeepers started accepting reservations a month ago. Even the smaller establishments, the ones that usually just cater to traveling scribes or out-of-goat merchants, are pulling out their best cushions and cinnamon sachets. There's good money to be made in scented privacy this week. Inside one such inn, the atmosphere has shifted. Candles burn earlier and lower. Someone's painted holly on the wall in crushed madder pigment. There's even a bowl of dates soaked in palm wine sitting in the corner, completely unattended. You're pretty sure someone's hiding behind the curtain giggling. The mood is part lust, part laughter, and a lot of "I won't remember this in the morning." Historians still argue whether Saturnalia had an official scent profile, but the perfumes associated with this season were warm, heady, and a little reckless. Myrrh, cassia, pine resin, and something vaguely smoky like the perfume equivalent of staying up too late and saying too much. And then there's Lupercalia. If Saturnalia is joyful chaos, Lupercalia is chaos with muscles. You walk into the Forum district a few weeks later, and the air is full of something more primal. A group of half-naked young men are jogging past, slapping people with goat-hide thongs, as one does during an ancient fertility ritual. The crowd cheers. Some people pretend to be outraged, but you notice no one actually moves out of the way. The love hotels, also fully booked. Again, but the ambience this time is less candlelit poem and more sensual mayhem. Think darkened chambers filled with wild laughter, spiced wine, and someone yelling about an oracle misinterpretation while trying to juggle two tunics. You pass by one in way where they've covered the walls in ivy and hung tiny bells on the doorposts. It smells like sandalwood and ambition. From the inside, you hear a crash and a triumphant shout that can only mean someone just knocked over a water jug on purpose. Even outside the official festivals, the love hotels ride these waves of seasonal indulgence. Vinalia, floralia, bacchanalia. Every celebration is an excuse to mix scent and secrecy, lust and ritual. You learn quickly that scent is part of the costume, just like the floral crown or the borrowed tunic. In the more refined inns, the staff prepare festival blends in advance. Tiny pouches of herbs, scent cakes shaped like apples or doves, vials of oil labeled boldness or fate. You run your fingers across a worn recipe tablet, once inscribed for Lupercalia, juniper, oil, dried fig leaf, and a whisper of clove smoke. It's meant to make you feel like you've just escaped something forbidden. Honestly, it works. Back in your own workshop, you're preparing your own version. Something soft at first, then slightly shocking. You blend crushed violet with mint and a touch of heated ginger root. Shamhat wrinkles her nose, but says it smells like kissing someone you weren't supposed to, and liking it. Perfect. You pour it into slim glass vials and tie them with red thread. They'll be gone by dusk. Outside, the festival still hums. Music rises in spirals, sometimes onky, sometimes not. Laughter spills around corners. Someone is definitely trying to dance in sandals they forgot were 2 sizes too small. But the rooms, the love hotels, that's where the stories pause for a moment. That's where people lean in closer, where whisper meets skin and scent becomes memory. Because the city might dance loud, but the nights, they always go quiet eventually. By the time the last reveler stumbles home from Lupercalia, the city has started to smell less celebratory. Not bad, exactly, but worn like silk after a long feast or wine spilled on marble and left too long in the sun. And that's where love hotels, no matter how glamorous, scented, or velvet draped, reveal their Achilles heel: sanitation. You enter one such in the morning after a festival, and the first thing that hits you isn't the scent of roses or mystery, it's the unmistakable bouquet of too many bodies, too little vinegar, and a candle that definitely burned into a pool of wax and regret. Historians still argue whether Roman inns had formal cleaning protocols, but most agree they probably followed the time-honored method of wipe it down, rinse it if you must, and throw some herbs over the rest, which means sanitation was a little interpretive. You watch as an innkeeper, still yawning, shuffles toward a room carrying a bucket, a reed broom, and what might be a half-dried sponge on a stick. She mutters under her breath about someone clogging the oil bowl with a grape wreath. You decide not to ask. Inside the room. The situation is recoverable. There's a cracked lamp, a cushion that has seen better centuries, and a strong smell of myrrh covering something less poetic. The perfumed oil from the night before has settled into the linen, into the floor, into the air itself. You could bottle the mood as OD decisions made quickly. The Romans did have tools, a basin of water mixed with lye soap, bundles of bay leaves and mint for scrubbing surfaces. Vinegar was their disinfectant of choice, especially for mopping and washing down communal benches. But still, this was a world without bleach, hand sanitizer, or any notion of deep cleaning. In wealthier establishments, attendants used scented wax to polish marble counters and threshold stones. It didn't clean much, but it smelled like someone had tried. You walk past a wall niche where a cluster of clay incense cones has been arranged artfully, probably more for fragrance than divine favor. The smoke helps, at least temporarily. You breathe in frankincense, cedar, and the faintest undertone of desperation. Fun fact, archaeologists once found a wax tablet detailing a bedroom freshening blend sold at a perfumery near the event. It included crushed iris root, fig resin, and a rare herb translated roughly as forgetting grass. Was it supposed to erase memory or just mask it? No one's quite sure. Back in the room, someone's left a half-burnt sachet hanging from the bedpost. Shamhat examines it and sniffs time and bad ideas. She reports. You nod solemnly. And let's not even get started on venereal health. Rome knew a lot about herbs, poultices, and folk remedies, but bacteria, germs, not a clue. There were ointments made with honey, sulfur, and even fermented fish paste. You wrinkle your nose just imagining it. Not all of these concoctions worked, but they did smell potent. And in the Roman world, sometimes the strength of the scent was mistaken for strength of effect. Public bathhouses offered a brief reprieve. Steam helped, so did scrubbing down with olive oil and estrigiol. The bath attendants, though, often whispered warnings about cursed rooms at nearby inns. If a guest left too pale, too flushed, or too quiet, people noticed. Some inns took it seriously. You see one that has hung bundles of rosemary above every doorway. Another sprinkles powdered charcoal in the corners of rooms after every guest, to absorb the memory, the owner says with a wink. You choose not to ask what memory needs absorbing. In your own workshop, you're experimenting with a new cleanser, lemon peel and crushed green olive paste mixed with white sand. Shamhat calls it hope in a bowl. You try it on a test floor, tile, and watch as the grime lifts slightly. There's a kind of ritual to it all. This cleaning, this attempt to scrub away passions, mess with leaves and hot water, and a dash of denial. You can imagine Roman lovers whispering, laughing, knocking over wine, and then someone else showing up with a sponge and pretending nothing happened. It's a strange intimacy, not the romance, but the reset. Even now, as the day grows warm and the air smells like sun-baked rose petals and sweat, you see innkeepers refluffing cushions, relighting oil lamps, relabeling scent bowls. One even arranges the sandals left behind into neat pairs, hoping their owners might return. The scent of the Love Hotel is not just perfume, it's smoke, sweat, linen, clay, and candle wax. Its history layered like unwashed tunics, familiar, flawed, and undeniably human. And as you walk back into the street, you can't help but inhale deeply. Still sweet, still Rome. By now you're beginning to realize that Rome's love hotels weren't just titillating sideshows. They were engines, real, humming, coin-clinking, whisper-swapping engines of the local economy. And like all good engines, they needed fuel. Sandal makers, wine dealers, olive oil merchants, curtain dyers, furniture haulers, poets for hire, and about 3 different kinds of pillow stuffers. You're sitting by the open archway of one such establishment right now, watching a delivery boy juggle amphorae of almond oil on his back like a sleep-deprived octopus. He grunts, deposits the cargo near the door, and vanishes down an alley, muttering about that one room with the slippery steps. Historians still argue whether inns and brothels had standardized pricing or if it was all wildly improvised based on mood, hairstyle, or phase of the moon, but everyone agrees these places moved a lot of money. One innkeeper tells you she spends nearly as much on linens and lamp oil as she does, bribing local officials to look the other way. That's not metaphorical. A bronze tally tablet on her counter lists her weekly outlay: saffron for scent, lemons for cleanup, wine jugs for ambience, and a suspiciously large entry simply marked misc. Tiberius Fund. You chuckle. You've seen that kind of fund before. You probably contribute to one every time you cross a street corner and hand over coins to a boy with a reed flute and zero musical talent. Back at the workshop, Shamhat has laid out a chart she made, with charcoal and goat spit, mapping the entire love economy. It's a marvel of circles, lines, and annoyed stick figures. In the center, sent you the nose that launched 1,000 sandal straps. Rome loved its smells. You made oils for the pillows, sachets for the curtains, incense for the courtyards, and emergency perfume pouches for guests who wanted to pretend they hadn't just sprinted across the forum to meet a lover. Each vial sold was another denarius, another transaction, another job. Fun fact, some Roman perfumers carved identifying marks into their wax seals. A popular one resembled a laurel wreath wrapped around a dolphin's tail. No one knows why. It could have meant fresh, or it could have meant you won't regret this purchase until tomorrow. One small hotel you visit has its own indoor garden, potted palms and basil sprouting under a skylight. The owner insists it makes guests feel like they're in Alexandria. You notice most of the Alexandrian decor is actually bits of old theater props and a rather dented statue of Apollo missing his left foot. Still, the guests seem impressed. And then there's the food. Many inns operated with tiny kitchens or partnered with nearby taverns. You spot one cook wrapping honeyed dates in fig leaves while shouting at a pigeon. Another is pounding garum into something he swears is romantic. Shamhat sniffs the air and immediately regrets it. There were always jobs, even for those on the fringes. A blind poet who recites verses outside the gates. A scribe who offers to record your evening in tasteful euphemism for a few coins, and a leftover meat skewer. And of course, the sandal boy, ready to shine your souls before you re-enter respectable society. Sometimes a guest leaves behind a ring or a note, or a debt unpaid. The local pawn shop thrives. There's an entire side industry just in selling abandoned garments. One woman swears she made a small fortune reselling togas she found under couches. The money never stops flowing. Even when the inn is quiet, the ripple effect keeps people moving. Candle makers, reed basket weavers, makers of tiny bronze bells used for room service summoning. Someone had to make those bells. Someone's still making them now. You sip your tea and watch as a cart rolls past with a sign painted in hurried Latin. Warm beds, cool wine, no judgment. It squeaks to a halt in front of a side door, and two people tumble out giggling, clearly on a second or third visit. Shamhat raises an eyebrow. Repeat customers, she says. The best kind. And they were, because regulars kept inns afloat. Between festival waves, between scandalous nights and long droughts, they whispered about favorite rooms, brought friends, paid in advance, and occasionally tried to help clean up. Those ones were rare, but cherished. You visit a tiny inn by the river that operates on a shoestring and one very charming parrot that mimics moans. Its owner sighs and says the bird brings in a certain clientele. You don't ask further, and for every successful place, 10 more failed. Overspent on marble bathtubs, ran out of fresh pine shavings, or couldn't keep the mold from turning into a personality. Those that survived learned to adapt, to pivot from house of desire to low-lit rest stop with incense, which, let's be honest, is still a business model. You head home through the buzz of late afternoon. You've got orders to fill, blends to revise, a client asking for something that smells like being 22 with no regrets. You're not even sure what that means, but you'll try. Rome thrived on scent and silver, and you, my friend, had both. By now, the empire has turned the corner. The laughter from the alleyways is thinner. The lamps flicker a little more nervously. You walk the same route home, past the same ivy-choked walls, but the wall gossip is changing, less about lovers and more about tax hikes, grain shortages, and strange new bishops preaching about modesty and restraint. The love hotels, once gilded with sandalwood and soft giggles, are growing quieter too, and not just from bad business. See. The world is shifting under your sandals. Christianity is moving from the margins to the marble steps of power. Once whispered about in the atrium corners, it now struts through because emperors convert. Edicts are signed, and suddenly, what used to be a wink and a candlelit night is now a sin with consequences. Historians still argue whether Emperor Constantine really cared about the moral reforms, or whether it was just good politics. But what's clear is this. By the mid-4th century, Rome's pleasure economy was in trouble. You pass a familiar inn one with ivy carved into the doorway, where you once delivered sachets of cedar and rose to a blushing senator and find it shuttered, a simple wax seal, cross-etched and flaking. Shamhat runs a finger over the carving and sighs. Too many rules. Not enough fun, she mutters. Some establishments rebrand. They rename themselves as resting houses or family guest quarters. The soft drapes come down. The figly frescoes get scraped away. One even puts up a sign advertising herbal teas and spiritual cleansing. You try the tea. It tastes like regret and boiled celery. But let's be honest, desire doesn't vanish. It just gets ... cleverer. One house near the edge of town starts holding prayer vigils at night, which mysteriously require two-person cubicles and perfumed anointing oils. Another starts marketing itself as a baths-only facility, but offers towel services with very specific scents, known for their aphrodisiac properties. You recognize your own blend in one of them, discreetly renamed Purity No. 4. You and Shamhat still get orders, though they arrive more discreetly now. A priest requests a scent for communing with the divine, and you deliver a vial labeled Clarity, knowing full well it smells like the garden behind his favorite inn. A wealthy matron sends for a blend to refresh my linens. You send jasmine and a wink, but the mood is different. What once felt open and mischievous now feels cloaked, a little furtive, a little cold. Fun fact: some of the earliest Christian councils included discussions on whether perfumed oils should be banned, tolerated, or reserved for church-sanctioned rituals. The results were ... mixed. Like most things with church politics, you still make oils, you still dream in scent, but more and more, your client work becomes private commissions. People wanting to remember how things used to smell. A blend that reminds them of spring festivals before the edicts. A vial that captures the scent of someone they once loved under the pomegranate trees. And some love hotels adapt barely. They remove the erotic frescoes, but keep the plush cushions. They stop hosting musicians, but let lovers sneak in through the kitchens. One clever innkeeper starts offering marital rekindling retreats, complete with discreet rooms and generous wine portions. Others aren't so lucky. You pass one place, once ablaze with candles and laughter, and see it's been converted into a grain store. The only scent left is dust and disappointment. Another is now a chapel. You step inside and recognize the arches, the scent of worn brick and myrrh. The apse sits where the pleasure rooms once did. You light a small oil lamp there, out of habit. Shamhat watches you from the doorway. Do you think the gods miss it? She asks. You shake your head. No, I think the people do. Because they do. Rome's streets are still loud, still teeming, but the laughter is different. The joke's more cautious. Even the street poets speak in allegory now. Their verses dance around desire instead of celebrating it. And yet, every now and then, someone stops by your workshop and asks for something warm. Something like old candlelight and citrus. You know what they mean. You never write the name on the jar, but you pour it anyway, because memory is stubborn. So you keep making oils. You teach younger apprentices. You label your blends in poetic code. Whisper hearth after rain. No one complains. Those who understand. Historians still argue whether the disappearance of Rome's love hotels was inevitable, whether it was religion, politics, plague, or just the entropy of all good things. You think it was grief, a quiet cultural mourning that no one dared name. But you, old, a little crooked from years of grinding resin and bending over flame still, open the shop each morning, still sort petals and smile at ghosts. Because somewhere out there, someone still wants to remember. And maybe, one day, things will shift again. Tonight, the alley behind your shop smells like figs and rising dough. It's quiet, the good kind. No shouting vendors, no late-night sandals clattering across cobblestones, no drunken reenactments of Ovid's racier bits. Just you, Shamhat, and a scroll of scandalous graffiti you found tucked behind the shelf, labeled cautionary oils. She reads it aloud in mock reverence, voice rich with sarcasm. To the boy with shoulders like baked bread, I forgive you, but my sandals do not. A pause, sign ... You both lose it. The owl, outside, hoots in agreement. You've always suspected the love hotels weren't just built for the body. They were confessionals of a kind. Not to gods or judges, but to each other. Carved into walls, whispered into silk pillows. scented into sandalwood. They were the voice of the city's heart. And what a loud, messy, wonderful heart it was. You still have some of those wall scraps, graffiti etched into plaster, pulled from demolished inns and shuttered bathhouses. One shows a crude little figure with stars for eyes and a jar in one hand. Above it, I came, I saw, I perfumed. Possibly your favorite line in the entire city. Historians still argue whether graffiti like this was art, vandalism, or ancient Yelp reviews. Some argue they were written by staff. Others think it was guests. You think it was everyone. Because who doesn't want to leave a little mark behind after a good night? Tonight's blend simmers on the stove. Frankincense, dried peach skin, and a touch of powdered violet. It's not for a client. It's for memory, for atmosphere, for the ghosts. Shamhat flips to the next scroll. A crude drawing of two stick figures, and the phrase, "M slept here, and also didn't." "I'm making a new label," she says, "for our private shelf. What's it called?" "Gossip oil." "Approved." You pour some into a small amphora, one with a faint chip on the handle, and a cork that squeaks like it's been keeping secrets. You tuck it between Disaster Blend, No. 3, and Temple, Oops. Some of the stories you've collected aren't even on plaster. A senator once commissioned a scent for negotiation confidence. The moment he left, his lover sent a scroll asking for a scent to erase negotiation scent. Both received different variations of cedar and mint. Neither knew the other had ordered. But the punchline, they both returned the next week, holding hands. Then there was the brothel madam who asked for a scent that would make a client feel like the gods themselves were seducing him. You gave her bergamot, neroli, and wild thyme. She returned a month later with a tray of candied dates and a note. I think it worked. Or he just owed taxes. Fun fact, some Roman inns etched their names and services into terracotta roof tiles. One tile fragment found in Ostia bears a faint symbol of a goat standing beside a wine jug, still debated among scholars. But you know that's code for open late. And then, of course, there were the temple servants. Yes, the lines blurred. Not everyone approved, but even the gods needed somewhere to smell nice. One such servant once traded you a sacred hymn in exchange for a vial of cinnamon. You've kept that tablet, not because you believe the hymn calls rain, but because she sang it once while bottling resin and the scent never quite left the walls. Shamhat leans back, scroll on her chest, eyes closing. Do you think we'll be remembered? You smile. Probably not. A pause. But maybe someone will find a jar one day, open it, and smell this exact night. That's enough. Outside, the owl lets out one long philosophical hoot. Inside, your hands are sticky with honeyed myrrh. The oil pot is nearly done. You write one last note for the evening, in your own messy shorthand, peach violet memory, for laughing ghosts and scroll readers. You place it on the private shelf, between hope and regret, and then, silence again. A good kind. A full kind, because even as the city shifts, even as the temples crumble and the law scrolls get longer and grumpier, the heart still beats in the oddest places, in laughter, in scent, in scandal scratched behind jars. Historians still argue whether these stories matter, whether the smutty graffiti, the perfume fragments, the gossip-soaked jars have value in the grand Roman tapestry. You think they're the best part, because they're real, and tomorrow, you'll still be here. Blending memory into oil, pouring yesterday into tomorrow, whispering jokes to a sleeping apprentice and bottling joy in amphorae no one else knows how to open. The inn shutters may close, the rules may tighten, but your door, fragrant, ridiculous, sacred, will always be ajar. The light shifts again, it's morning proper now, the kind that catches on rooftops and golden plaster, warms the broken cobbles and slaps awake the roosters with zero regard for their dignity. The alley behind your workshop is already humming. Someone selling yesterday's bread with today's confidence. A goat yells, Tyloo, probably. Inside, the air is soft with embers and memory. You've lit the last blend. It's subtle. Lemon balm. Dried fig leaf. A whisper of sweet fennel. Meant to usher in peace, not parade. It's your closing note. And now, it's your opening one. Because today isn't just the end of a story. It's the start of the echo. You glance at your shelves. Each amphora, each flask and folded parchment, pouch, they're all pieces of lives that passed through the love hotels, the bathhouses, the temple cubicles, and borrowed couches of a city too alive to care if it was scandalous. This scent, that one over there. They all carry something. A kiss, a betrayal, a snore after too much honey wine. Shamhat is awake again, blanket around her shoulders, sipping tea with the steady grace of someone who absolutely did not just knock over a jar. With her foot, "What time is it?" she asks. "Roman time," you reply. "So, ... depends who's counting." She nods. "Did the owl forgive us yet?" He blinked slowly. Might have been a curse, might have been acceptance. Classic owl. She joins you by the still, and for a long moment, you just sit there, not speaking, breathing in what's left of the past 20 sections of scandal and candlelight, oils and whispery politics, of laughter scraped onto walls and buried beneath time. Historians still argue whether love hotels in ancient Rome were dens of depravity or necessary sanctuaries, whether they represented moral decline or social innovation. You say, why not both? You've seen how messy love can be, how scent lingers in bedsheets, in stairwells, in prayers and poems. You've bottled the aftermath of pleasure and cleaned the charcoal after panic. You've made blends that forgave and ones that warned. You've known people who rented a room for the hour and left changed forever, and in your own little perfumeria, half step removed from the action, but never fully outside a Douve, learned to recognize the smell of truth, and also of lies that wanted to be kind. So tonight, before the city remembers how to yell again, you sit by the fire. You dip your fingers in the newest blend, just one drop on the wrist. It smells like ending and beginning, like warm stone, fading laughter, and the faintest trace of candied date on someone's breath. Shamhat passes you a parchment. "What's this?" "A new blend idea," she says. "4 mornings after ... everything." You read the name, "Forgive us our fun." It says ... approved. You write it down, add a star, then fold it carefully and slip it into the little ledger marked personal, experiments and regrets, because some blends are too honest for the market, and some stories only whisper. The owl hoots again, just once. The city exhales, and now, at last, the story closes. You lie back on your mat, the scent of the latest blend, curling through the room like a soft lullaby. The lamp flame flickers but does not waver. Outside, the clay tiles hold the last warmth of yesterday's sun, and the alphanally has gone silent. You let your body sink into the reed mat, not just from fatigue, but from something deeper, a contentment, maybe, or the kind of quiet that comes only after a story has told itself all the way through. The air is full, but not heavy, like it knows the dance is over, but the music might still return, faintly, sometime soon. You close your eyes, and in the hush between waking and sleep, the echoes return, not loud, not urgent, just familiar. The creak of wooden shutters, the sigh of warm oil on cool stone, the rustle of robes, the murmur of laughter, the scrape of stylus on wax. Somewhere, the faintest trace of fig and violet lingers on your wrist, and as your thoughts slow and settle, you realize the story didn't end. It just paused, for breath, for silence, for rest. You've been a part of something scented, scandalous, and sacred, and now, you've earned your peace, so let it all drift. Let the city soften into night, let the oil cool, let the dreams begin. Greater than end of script, sweet dreams.